Joining us is attorney Tom Kulik, who is a partner in Scheef and Stone, and I'm just going to say he's an expert in internet privacy law, and I say that because Republicans and industry officials, were complaining about browsing and app history restrictions, saying they unfairly burdened internet providers, meaning Google and Facebook had a big advantage over them. Is that true? Is it not? I don't know. But President Trump is about to sign this new law into effect. We're expecting him to sign it any time now. But is that true? And what's the true story? So we're now going to the phones, and we're going to talk to Tom about just that. Good morning.
Good morning, Gary. How are you?
I'm a little confused about privacy, and I don't know how to feel. I don't know whether I want my browser, I guess, if you will, or AT&T or Time Warner Cable sharing and selling who I am to everybody. Is that what this is really all about?
Well, I think that's part of it, Gary. I think it really comes down to an effort to address net neutrality or internet openness that was actually created and passed by the FCC in 2015, and I'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
But you and I are concerned about the same thing. I'm actually in the same boat with you on this one because I think many of your listeners don't understand just how much the ISPs track. And by ISPs, we're talking about the internet service providers that are providing the window through your browser to actually access the internet, as opposed to a website providing services on it like Google or other social media applications like Twitter. And any website that's out there that has a privacy policy that, in fact, is enforceable through the Federal Trade Commission under Section 5 of the FTC Act. These rules themselves, which came down in 2015, in 2016, and have not yet been implemented. They were actually going to be implemented at the end of this year. By repealing this, it is taking away the application of a framework that would require them to see our consent as consumers online before selling or otherwise sharing web browsing data and other private information to advertisers and third parties. So, yeah, I'm with you on this. I'm a little concerned because I think there needs to be something there, and I think there will be something there. The question is what.
All right, so prior to his leaving office, President Obama got this passed through. But who were the sides? Because it seemed to me there were a lot of the original people who were perusing the internet and wanted everything free. I likened it to back in the early days. I was talking to my producer here about the early days of satellite, where we could get the free feeds from the networks without paying for anything. Is that kind of very similar?
Well, in a way. I mean, I think what would be good to lay the table for everybody to understand is we really have two parties here when we look at any type of regulation or enforcement mechanism. The one I've already explained, which is the Federal Trade Commission, which is a consumer protection agency that has actual enforcement authority regarding privacy and the enforcement of those privacy policies on the internet. The FTC, though, does not regulate common carriers, and that's essentially a Telecommunications Act issue, and the FCC traditionally has done that under its statutory authority. So back in 2015, there was a reclassification for ISPs and broadband carriers to come within that specific definition, so that there would be a push for what people call internet openness or net neutrality. Now, as a result of that, this was the next step in October of last year to have some type of rules in place that would require an opt-in for people to allow those ISPs to use their information, and that's what's being repealed. So
now,
you have a push and pull there between the FCC and the FTC, and people on both sides that are thinking, we need to have some type of authority, but who should do it?
Well, and it went along party lines over the last week, right?
Yes, it did.
It's Republicans now are saying it makes them look greedy. Like, well, it's all about the money with the big companies. And,
well, You know, it's a great point. I think the thing that people can take away from this is that they have sided with the opponents to these regulations that basically said, hey, this is going to stifle innovation. It's going to stifle investment because there's these rules that have to be applied. And I'll be blunt. I think, you know, it's important that there be continuity between what the FTC does and what the FCC would implement. And there was no continuity between these two. It was a little bit more stringent on the FCC side. Now, as a consumer, I don't see that as necessarily a bad thing. As an attorney, I feel that there should be some continuity. So if these rules are being repealed and President Trump signs this, I think everybody needs to get to the table to implement something that would apply to ISPs so that we have continuity between what website providers, you know, do on the web and what the ISPs who give us that window to access the web, what they need to do with that information as well.
So why, in the first place, does Google and Facebook get a buy on it anyways?
Well, I tell you, they're not necessarily getting a buy on this because Google and Facebook, as you'll notice, they're providing different services online. Those services are subject to terms of use and privacy policies which specifically outline what they see, what they use, how they share that information. And that, in and of itself, is actually enforceable, both through not only you as a consumer who can contact them regarding how that's being used and actually opt out of certain usage, but by the FTC to enforce a failure of them to comply with the strict requirements of their privacy policies. In fact, there also have been actions by states' attorney general regarding that as well. So they're not getting a buy.
Yeah, I heard that Facebook got sued at one point for a class action suit. Was it because they were actually, and see if I got this right, and it's no longer doing it, but when you went someplace and purchased something, that information could have been shared with your friends.
Yes. Essentially, what they were doing is, they were trying to take the information there have been actually a number of pieces of litigation, hijacking your names and face and facial recognition, but here it was where they would be looking at your friends list and being able to share that information with advertisers as well. That was not specifically set forth within their policies, and so that's what some of the uproar was. Same thing actually in a different context with Vizio recently in their smart TVs. They were actually collecting your viewing habits without actually telling you that, and they were actually an enforcement action was brought against them both by the New Jersey Attorney General and the FTC, and that settled for $2.2 million, and that was just recently.
Okay, but let me ask you something. Does anybody really read those terms of use policies? I mean, we don't even know. Somebody did, obviously. There was a lawsuit, but me looking at this, I don't know whether I've agreed to it or not. I just wanted to use the service.
Gary, I'm with you there. And they could be tedious. It's very lawyer-oriented sometimes when you read through this. But I have to advise everyone, your listeners, because of what's happened here, look at what they have. Some of those privacy policies are actually fairly short. Some of them are detailed. But I think it behooves everyone, with all the sites that you visit, it's remarkable how much information and analytics is being put together on your viewing habits and how that's used. So when you say, wow, I can use this Gmail for free and I can use Facebook for free, well, it's not really free. They're gathering that data and using that data to make money from it. And in most cases, it's by sharing that data for some type of ad revenue.
Yeah, see, I've got a brother who I swear lives in a cave with no electricity anymore because he goes, Gmail, that's the Antichrist. I mean, you can't let that. Oh no, never use that, Gary. And I'm freaking out all of a sudden in the conversation because what information are they getting about me that I care about? I mean, if I'm not going into any nefarious websites and I'm not purchasing things that I shouldn't be purchasing, should I be fearful of anything, or is it just they're getting my buying habits and that's okay because it's fitting into some demographic or psychographic that, okay, Gary is somewhere between this age, so naturally he's going to be buying this?
That's a great question. I think ultimately everyone has to remember, and there's actually two facets to this. The first one is when we use a browser, that's a window to the internet, to that internet service provider, and they're seeing everything. It's like looking at everything that you're doing. It's what you're reading, what you're seeing, your shopping habits, your political viewpoints, anything that you're doing on the web, they're seeing. with respect to any website you're accessing, there will be a privacy policy there that says exactly what they are looking at and exactly how they share it. So there's a little bit more specificity with respect to that. And I think that's what has everybody up in arms here, is that because the ISPs are such a window in providing that access to the web, how are they using that data? And that's what's been unclear, and that's the reason we had these rules promulgated. I think the pushback was that these rules were not exactly did not exactly correlate perfectly with what the rules are in place for those other web providers, and I think that was part of this. Although, as I said at the beginning of your program when you invited me on, I think this goes to a whole net neutrality thing, and there's been a very big push by these ISPs and others not to have these net neutrality rules in place. They want to be able to throttle your abilities, the ability of you to obtain content through the web. They want to do certain things, and they're pushing back and lobbying hard against it, and I think that's what part of this is.
All right, so in the end, let's say President Trump then signs this into law. It still doesn't go into effect immediately, right?
It probably does. I mean, it may not. The Congress reviewed these rules under its Congressional Review Act authority, and so that would be actually set forth when he actually signs this. Those rules, by the way, weren't in place yet. Mm-hmm. They were there, but they weren't effective yet. They were going to be effective in December. So everybody was preparing for this, but obviously there was a strong lobbying effort to try to roll these back. And I think the Republicans have to be careful here, because I think this can come back and bite them. There's consumers like you and me itself. I take my lawyer hat off here, and I'm a consumer just like you on the web. I'm concerned about it. I think there needs to be something. And the FCC chairman, L.L.P, himself has specifically stated that he's in favor of a modified, lighter rule type of approach to this that allows enforcement of a neutral internet but not hampering investment. So we're going to have to take him to task and hold him to that to see if that's actually going to happen.
And see, he's even been questioned, because wasn't he CEO or a legal advisor for one of the big, I want to say Verizon or something?
Yeah, I think he was. I'm sorry, I can't recall that off the top of my head. But he has been very influential and very outspoken in his time on the FCC. So now that he's the commissioner, it'll be very interesting to see how he walks that line, because everyone believes that there needs to be something in place. The question is what? And hopefully whatever is put in place is then has continuity with what the FTC currently does with websites on the internet, and we got to keep our fingers crossed there.
All right. So the bottom line is, I'm just going to ask you. You're an attorney. You have it. This is your field. Do you use a secure browser? Do you put tape over your computer screen?
My initial response was, I can neither affirm nor deny that I do any of those things.
Of course.
But I will tell you that your listeners, I myself don't, but I do use other types of web tracking blockers and things. And I think there's three things ultimately that your users and your listeners can think about. One is an anonymizer, such as the Onion Router or Tor. You may have heard about this. That's just a network of private servers that act as a buffer between your access to the internet, and they actually are a separate private network. It's free, but you are totally anonymous to the web. Any of the things that you're doing are tracked through an anonymous IP address out onto the web. That's an Internet Protocol address that would identify your computer. Okay. That's one way of doing it. But if you get on there, I will tell you that since it's so good and so encrypted, some bad elements tend to use the Tor network for nefarious things. And so you may actually get on Homeland Security's or somebody else's watch list.
Because so somewhere along the line, yeah. See,
I can't confirm that would happen, but I think it's something that some people do worry about. There's also virtual private networks, or VPNs, that are out there that are an encrypted connection between your PC and the web. You see that mostly with workplace environments with employees who remotely access their desktop from home. There are some that are out there. There's usually, though, a cost involved, and you have to be careful with the free ones because they may defeat the purpose, because they may be collecting your data and using it to finance that. So I tell everyone, this is not perfect. This does not address the underlying ISP problem, but it does save some of this agita that we have over what's happening. And those are web tools and web trackers. For instance, there's something called HTTPS Everywhere. That's a secure connection that if another website has that type of certificate, you'll be able to access that securely, and that's a good thing. There are also other browser extensions like Ghostery on Firefox or Chrome Chrome or Chrome's incognito. And what they do is they detect and block tracking technologies that are used by websites and their servers for ad content. So that gives you another level of protection and somewhat a level of anonymity when you're there, but it's not the level that you would have with a Tor or otherwise. They still see everything you're doing, but they're seeing less. And so that's actually what I use all the time, and I would recommend all your listeners look at that, or at least use those, and look at the other ones as options.
If only Hillary had followed your advice, right?
Well, you know, she knew where I was. She knew where I was, Gary. I never got the call.
Okay. And the Democratic Party, if only they would have secured those servers. I don't know. Oh, my. All right. Well,
good as mine.
all right. Well, thank you so much. It's great advice. This is Tom Kulik. You're an attorney. You're much more than that, though. Your career has spanned everything. Weren't you a sitting judge at one time?
No, I wasn't actually. I was a former computer systems engineer, and that I became one of the earliest technology attorneys. I dealt with the Internet since it was no longer the ARPANET and was given to the masses for everyone to actually access.
Oh, my gosh. You go way back with
privacy for probably the last 20 years.
Oh, my gosh.
I'm a technology lawyer and intellectual property attorney, and I deal with everything that's technology related with the law in your business. So.
And are you fearful for the future of the Internet, or are you optimistic that we're going to work this out?
I am always a glass half full personality, so I am cautiously optimistic. I do believe there will be pushback on this by what the Republicans have done, because something needs to be in place. And I'm hoping that it's a rule set that is, okay, it may be this lighter touch that the commissioner talks about, but it's a rule set that has continuity with what the FTC does. And although that's not perfect, it's a good mechanism and has been working. It just requires us, sadly, to read those privacy policies. But as I said, there are ways we can protect ourselves, and taking that next step to do that, to see how things are being used, there's a certain level of visibility on the web that I'm comfortable with, and I think everyone is. Let's hope that it's not going to be unfettered, because I, like you, feel very uncomfortable with all this being used and then having all these ads and other third-party marketing materials sent to me, and everyone knowing exactly what I'm thinking, what I'm shopping, and that gets a little creepy. So remember, when you're online, it's being seen,
all right,
like a postcard.
And one final question, and this goes back a couple of months ago when President Obama allegedly gave the Internet to the international community.
Yes.
Is that something we should be fearful of, that the Chinese are going to tell us what we're allowed to watch and not watch?
Well, I've talked a lot about this. My problem with that happening was people criticize, well, the U.S. is controlling it. But, you know, we're a democratic nation, and honestly, we did a pretty good job reviewing that. But now trying to taking that away from the United States opens the door for the UN to do this, and because of certain antitrust exceptions that were enjoyed in this context, it opens the door for another state power, namely China or others that are not necessarily friendly to the United States, to impose certain restrictions or their own will on the usage of the net. So that's one I'm watching very closely. I'm hoping that does not happen. I think there's a large enough community out there that may prevent that from happening, but only time will tell.
All right. Well, thank you. The good information. I appreciate it. Tom Kulik, partner in Scheef and Stone. Thank you so much.
Gary, it's my pleasure.
Have a good day.
Thanks for having me.